It's 19 minutes past 9. Joining me in the studio now is Camila Batmanghelidjh from Kids Company. Camila, very good morning to you.
Good morning.
Before we get on to sort of some of the more difficult questions, I mean, you've been the centre of a maelstrom over the past few days. How have you come through this personally? It must have been a terrible experience for you.
I've actually personally been very calm and serene because I never went up with the media to come down with it. But when I've got upset, it's been because of the children and young people, and that's the only time I get tearful. The rest of the time, I'm very level, because what I think we're being exposed to is a sort of massive public hatred, kind of driven by the media in many ways.
Why do you think that is? Because the media has been extremely supportive of you in particular, and indeed Kids Company, over the years. So why do you think the media, if it has turned against you, why do you think it has?
I think they've been fed misinformation, actually. It all started with Miles Goslett, a reporter who has never visited Kids Company, never met me. I actually offered for him to come and visit and speak to me. He claimed that there was a lady who hadn't been thanked for her donation to Kids Company, and that we hadn't reported properly back on her donation, both of which were lies. Not only I have copies of that lady's thank you letters, she was given a whole page in our newsletter.
She gave you £200,000.
Yes, and the Charities Commission approved her report. So this is how this whole situation started, because Miles made it out that we were ungrateful and that we didn't report properly, both of which were entirely untrue.
Now, he's written a little bit of a history of all of this on the Spectator website, which I know you haven't seen. I'm going to read you out a paragraph from this, because he says he's met people who've worked for you, and he's quoting two of them. And I mean, you're not going to like what I'm going to read out, but because it's symptomatic of the accusations that are against you. I'm reading it out because I want you to respond to it and say why it's wrong. You
can be completely open and transparent with me and ask me any questions you want to.
Well, this is from, apparently, of course, there's no name, somebody who apparently worked at Kids Company. They say Camila is basically pretty impossible to work with, and she's given the charity sector a bad name. People need to realise that Kids Company is her personal empire. I'm not aware of her having anything else in her life. I'm not aware of her having any friends with whom she can just go and have a cup of coffee. That is not healthy. The charity is her, and she is the charity. Is there any aspect of that that's true?
No, it isn't, because the organisation had 650 staff, about 10,000 volunteers, some 500 clinical students did their work experience with us. It had a board of trustees. So it's a massive organisation, and it can't possibly run just on my personality.
But you were the figurehead. I mean, we all knew you, partly because of your character, the way that you dress. Everyone's fascinated by you and what you've done. And do you think that part of the problem has been that Kids Company is a bit like a company that grows too quickly? The chief executive is brilliant at manufacturing widgets, but once it gets into sort of reading the balance sheet and all of that, then they start to struggle. Is that what's happened to you?
No, it's interesting you say that, because I think that's one of the prejudices. Because I don't wear a suit and I don't carry a briefcase, I haven't sort of bought into the corporate packaging. People assume, and especially because I'm a woman and I work with children, people assume that then I don't understand figures and I can't organize systems. But actually, if you really think about it, I organized with my team and we raised 163 million. So that requires quite a lot of work. And last year it came from 77,000 different sources, including £1 coins. So administratively, we must be pretty good to be able to get that amount of money in.
You say that, but you will have seen the front page of The Guardian this morning, I presume.
No, I haven't seen any of the papers.
Kids company chiefs ignored cash warnings. Finance bosses told charities trustees to build up funds or risk catastrophe. It says here that you were warned by your auditors for 5 successive years that you should build up reserves because you didn't have enough money to continue for more than 3 months. And yet you ignored all of those warnings.
It is true, it's absolutely true, that we had those discussions with the auditors. And we too wanted reserves. And in fact, that's why we continuously spoke to government. The problem with Kids Company, and the reason we've had these difficulties, is that children and young people are self-referring off the street. So they hear about our provision on the street and they make their way to Kids Company. So in the last 19 years, because children have asked for help directly, no local authority was prepared to pay for them. So we haven't had 1 pence from a local authority.
No, but you've had a lot from central government, haven't you?
Let me finish. Or a mental health trust. So what ended up happening is that we ended up with really large numbers of very disturbed children and young people. We were overwhelmed by it. And since the Blair government, we'd been talking to the government about the fact that we can't cope with this sort of caseload. And repeated central governments gave us a grant of about 20%. And they kept saying, next year, we'll sort you out completely. We'll find a funding stream for you so that you don't have to be so hand to mouth. Most recently, just before the summer, during the summer, I spoke to Oliver Letwin, who then said that he was going to find us about 20 million, because I had warned everyone that we would not be able to fundraise anymore because we'd been Charity of the Year for practically every bank. We'd basically run out of people that we could go to. We've been going for 19 years.
That's a really odd thing to say, because people who are successful in fundraising continue in that way normally. It's to say you run out of new people, success breeds success, and you were successful in raising a huge amount of money. So I'm slightly at a loss to understand why you think it would suddenly have come to an end.
Because the scale had become impossible, driven by children and young people pouring in through the doors. You know, most charities survive, large charities survive by having contracts. So, for example, the local authority may give them work to do and then they pay the charity. We couldn't do that because the kids were coming from the street and using the service, so no one was paying. And it's exactly the problem Childline had. And it couldn't survive on its own, so the NSPCC had to absorb it.
Of this £163 million that you've raised, what proportion of that came from the taxpayer?
In any given year, we had sort of about 4 million a year. So the proportions were most recently 4 million from central government, about 19 to 20 million raised by us.
Because, I mean, you have grown very, very quickly in the last few years, haven't you? I mean, you've more or less doubled in size in the last 4 or 5 years. That must have put pressures on your administration. And I'm slightly at a loss to understand why you don't, I mean, in any interview I've seen you do, you don't acknowledge those pressures. You don't say, well, yeah, we may have got a few things wrong. You're sort of straight down the line saying, no, our administration was fine. Alan Yentob, I saw last night on Channel 4 News, a quite extraordinary interview, I thought, said, no, there is absolutely no problem. Well, I'm sorry, an organisation does not close its doors, does not effectively go bust when there aren't any problems, and it's up to the chief executive and the board of trustees to sort those problems out or identify them.
There was a problem, and I've said there was a problem. Where I acknowledge that there was a problem is that we didn't raise enough funds. Where I disagree with the narrative out there is the suggestion that we had financial mismanagement, because actually in 19 years we passed every audit clear. We had 2 additional audits by central government which we passed clear as well. But all the audits said we didn't have enough cash flow because we were so constantly. We started the year not knowing where our money was coming from, and we had to raise it month by month as we went along. And that's why we went to central government to say, please, we can't manage.
You had 5 years to sort this out. The problems were identified in 2010 about the lack of reserves, and you ignored those warnings for 5 years.
We didn't ignore them.
Well,
we went. No, we didn't ignore them.
Why didn't you build up any reserves?
No, because we couldn't. This is the point. Everyone is having the conversation just about the financials. What they're not having the conversation about is the clinical, which is we had too many very disturbed children. Do you know, I ended up having to hire my own psychiatrists, psychiatric nurses, occupational therapists, child protection officers, because we couldn't get the cases that we had into social services or child mental health because locally those agencies were not coping. One of our biggest provisions is in a borough where the local social work department has just failed Ofsted. So we were holding too many serious cases, and we kept going back to central government and saying we shouldn't be having kids who are jumping off bridges, who are cutting themselves, who are being sexually and physically abused. We shouldn't, as a charity, be holding cases like that.
Camilla, we'll both catch our breath because we've got to go to the news and travel. We'll hear more from Camilla Batmanghelidjh in just a second. I'm Ian Dale at Breakfast. LBC News Time at 9:31. 9:36 here on LBC. We're in the company of Camilla Batmanghelidjh from Kids Company. Amanda in Brixton has emailed to say, I donated to Kids Company last year and I did get a receipt. So it's very interesting looking at the tweets and texts that are coming in. There are no shades of grey here. There are either people who think that it's entirely your fault or other people think you're a complete saint. There's no sort of middle ground on this. Can I ask you, Camilla, where did the £3 million go that the government sent to you last week?
Okay, so the government claim that they didn't know that we were going to use part of it as a salary. That is not true. I have in my possession an email exchange between us and the government where they were fully aware that we were waiting for their money to come for the salary to be paid. In fact, this 3 million was part of a repackaging grant so that we would have to shrink Kids Company in order to make it sustainable as an organisation. So it's very disingenuous to claim that they didn't know.
Why haven't you released those emails?
I now have actually.
Oh, you have, right?
Yeah, I released one of them last night because I think this is the sort of culture of this debate at the moment is one where the government doesn't, the Cabinet Office, because it's not all of government, by the way, even in the machinery of government, they're fighting over this issue with different people having different agendas. One set want to support Kids Company and make sure that it survives, and another set want to make sure that it disappears.
You see, this is, again, I think people find that struggle with this because if you go back to Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, I mean, Gordon Brown was a massive supporter of yours. David Cameron has been a massive supporter. Ian Duncan Smith. I think people struggle with the fact that there are, so you say, people within government who want to see Kids Company disappear. Why would they do that? Why would they think that?
I don't really know why, but I think that what I do know is that I really had some major challenges with them over the fact that I kept telling them that the child protection situation in this country was really problematic. I had quite a few arguments with Michael Gove, with Tim Loughton over...
As a former children's minister.
Before it became evident that there was very serious problems over child sexual...
Neither of them are... Well, Tim Loughton isn't a government minister anymore. Michael Gove is now at the Justice Department. So they can't be having any influence on what's happening now.
Well, they are actually... Tim Loughton keeps coming out publicly and saying that he didn't want us to get a grant when he was in the Department of Education. And this is so disingenuous again, because he was having cups of tea with me in my office. Never did he suggest that there was any problem whatsoever with the way we were functioning. I don't have in our possession a single letter from government that says we misreported, we didn't do things properly, we should change anything. So to hear from them and to hear from civil servants that have never come to Kids Company, never met us, that they recommended that we didn't get the money, it's like you suddenly think, what are you dealing with? These people have never been there.
Let me put something to you that you said to Victoria Derbyshire yesterday. You said, I'm being suppressed because I know about sexual abuse claims against senior people.
No, I didn't say...
That's a direct quote.
No, what I said is generally... I believe that there is a suppression of people who are speaking up about child protection. The government's closed the College of Social Work. It was...
No, this was something specific that you said. You said, I am being suppressed because I know about sexual abuse claims against senior people, i.e. to do with the child sex acquired.
What I'm trying to... Yes, I do know about... I have been communicated with by child protection police officers who are investigating and who have been investigating very well-known people.
No, but your allegation was that the government are trying to suppress you.
Yes, I'm just about to explain it to you. I said that in the wider context, that there is a suppression of people who are speaking up about child protection. And I personally have spoken up about child protection issues related to now, and I've been approached by police officers in relation to historic child sexual abuse issues.
But the implication here is that you believe that that people within government, whether it's one or two politicians or senior civil servants, are trying to keep you quiet because of what you know about historic child sexual abuse cases.
No, I think they're trying generally to get rid of people who are challenging them about child sexual abuse issues.
Why is that?
Because I think there is a big problem in this country in relation to massive scale child sexual abuse, childhood maltreatment across the country, current, and there is very serious concerns in relation to well-known people in the past, and that is not my business to discuss. But the inquiry will do that.
But your direct allegation, therefore, is that there are people in current government, whether politicians or senior civil servants, who have an interest in keeping this quiet, and by keeping you quiet, they can keep that quiet.
I think they do have an interest in keeping historic sexual abuse allegations quiet. You don't need my personal evidence. It's all unfolding, isn't it? Senior ministers were abusing children. Civil servants, some civil servants were involved in suppressing the evidence. And what I'm saying is, even now, I'm aware of police officers who have evidence in relation to this stuff, having their investigations not addressed appropriately. And I've been in discussion with that group of people as well.
Now, what about the allegations that have been made in the last 24 hours against your organisation for, I think suppressing is probably overdoing it, but not acting on allegations of sexual abuse that went on within Kids Company? First
of all, I need to really correct this. The challenge that has been brought to us is not about sexual abuse within Kids Company. It's really, really important to differentiate that. The police...
Well, the Newsnight allegation last night, you were sitting in the studio watching the film as I was watching it on TV.
I'm trying to explain to you what it was. What has been brought to our attention is that allegedly there had been some sexual activity between two young adults, and that we had that information. This sexual activity allegedly did not take place at Kids Company, but we had that information and we didn't report it. As it transpires, we didn't have that information. So actually, this allegation and the way it's been constructed is so untrue.
But the allegation was that the girl involved, who I think was age 16 or 17, she apparently says she did report it to Kids Company staff and it wasn't acted upon. You're saying that she didn't?
I can't go into detail, but what I can tell you is that from the information we were given, this individual wasn't even a Kids Company student or individual.
Where do we go from here? I mean, I heard you say recently that you wanted to have an opportunity to restart Kids Company, which I can understand just from the point of view of the children that now are left in limbo. If a philanthropist came up and said, Camilla, I completely believe in you, I think you've been traduced, I think this is completely unfair, here's £5 million to restart, would you?
Yeah, my concern is not Kids Company or myself. My concern is that we shut the door to a lot of children and young people and destitute families who saw Kids Company as their home and their family environment. And what people don't realise is that, unfortunately, a very destructive media game and series of unfair and inaccurate briefings led to the destruction of what in effect was a home for a lot of kids. And what I'm trying to do is to try and see whether we can recreate that community, which was very, very important to those children and young people.
I said to someone last night that I was going to interview you today, and they said to me, well, can you put this question to her? And they said she seems to blame everyone else for what's gone wrong here and doesn't seem to think that she's done anything wrong at all. Do you think you've done anything wrong at all?
I think, I think I've absolutely fell short of being able to raise the right amount of money. I also didn't manage to get the machinery of government to come to the table appropriately. And it's very telling that it took us to close for all these local authorities and the Cabinet Office to eventually come together to decide what to do about these destitute and devastated children. It would have been good if they'd come before, which is what I really needed. I found it very difficult to see, for example, the leader of one local authority criticize us in the media when I know that just one of the families we've been referring over 20 times for child protection to this particular borough, and they wouldn't take the case. And this is the sort of experience that we have had, which has made it so difficult for us. We were completely overwhelmed by the scale of the problem arriving at our door, and I failed to fundraise for it this last year, and I failed to be able to get government and local authorities to absorb the seriousness of the concerns we were carrying.
And just finally, if you can't restart Kids Company, what does your future hold? Have you thought about it?
No, because my entire concern has actually been the children. Literally, what I'm worried about is that there are groups of them who won't have enough to eat next week. So I'm just right now trying to concentrate on finding the money for that. And that's why it's so important to clear up these allegations of financial mismanagement, which are so untrue, because that has implications about whether I will be able to raise the money to then be able to meet these children's needs.
Well, if there are any philanthropists listening, we'll put them in touch with you. Camila Batmanghelidjh, thank you so much for taking so much time with us here on LBC. This is LBC, it's 9:49.
I've been enjoying Wimbledon as usual this time of year.
Yes.
And it's very interesting to see the speed of the serve. But what I want to know is, where do they measure the speed of the serve? Is it as the ball leaves the racket head, as it crosses the net, or when it hits the floor, or when it lands on the other side ready for the person?